Evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third annual Centennial Conference Basketball Championship Playoff Preview. My name is Steve Ulrich. I'm the Executive Director of the Centennial Conference, and tonight I have an esteemed panel of guests who will be joining me to talk a little bit about not only the men's tournament, but also the women's tournament. From Franklin and Marshall, Brian Stabby is joining us. From Washington College, Connor Flegel. And we have a special guest tonight, the host of Hoopsville on d3hoops.com, Dave McHugh. Dave, well-known basketball aficionado in the area, has seen all the teams and will be able to add not only a regional perspective but a national perspective to what's taking place this weekend. We hope to be joined by Tim McCarty, former Johns Hopkins basketball standout. He'll be doing the broadcasting on CentennialConference.tv this weekend of the men's semifinals and finals. But we're having some technical difficulties, and we hope that Tim will be able to join us a little later in the show. If you'd like to participate interactively, you can follow us along on Twitter. Ask us any questions, obviously within 130 characters. Save a few characters for pound CC Hoops 15. We'll try to ask our esteemed panel the questions that you may have, so you can play along if you will. Gentlemen, let's start with the men's basketball tournament. 5 teams qualify in the Centennial. Johns Hopkins, the top seed, Franklin and Marshall 2, Dickinson 3. Those 3 teams receive a first-round bye. First round game will be between number 4 seed Gettysburg and the 5th seed McDaniel College Green Terror. That matchup will take place at Bream Gym at Gettysburg College Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. And Connor, I'm going to start with you as the member of the panel who has maybe the nonpartisan viewpoint, as the Shoremen and Shorewomen from Washington College did not qualify for the playoffs. When you take a look at McDaniel first on the men's side, what strikes you about them?
Well, we've done this chat 3 years in a row, and for year 3 out of 3 now, I don't have a team that I work for that's in the playoffs. I guess I'm just the neutral voice that's going to come back on here every year in and year out, but it's okay. McDaniel, Tim Stewart, 4th in the conference in scoring, 10th in rebounding, is clearly the best player that the Green Terror have, but then they don't really have anyone else that jumps out at you on the offensive end. They have 4 players that average between 7.5 and 7 points per game. But Stewart doesn't necessarily have that big 1-2 punch of a compatible player to go along with him. And, offensively, McDaniel last in the league in scoring, but they're one of the top teams on the defensive end. So they really make their living by playing those teams, as we've seen in the last couple of years, to those low-scoring 60 to 55 type games and hope that they grind you out. And it was effective earlier this year. They beat Franklin and Marshall, sorry, Brian. They knocked off Dickinson. So they've got a couple wins over the top teams in the league, but yet, they lost their last 3 games to end the regular season, which is always a concern when you need to get hot come playoff time at the end of the year.
Dave, you've had an opportunity to see the Green Terror. Obviously, well-balanced scoring attack, play, tremendous defense. What strikes you about the Green Terror?
Consistency, or maybe the lack thereof. You look at the 4-game slide back in January that started with a loss to Ursinus on the road. Understandable loss maybe to Hopkins, and then, of course, lost to Muhlenberg at home, and then lost out of conference to Valley Forge. You then see that a little bit with this 3-game slide at the end with Swarthmore, Johns Hopkins, and Gettysburg, especially in a Gettysburg game. I think they absolutely had to win. I think you want that game at the Gill Center. You don't want to have to travel back up the road to Gettysburg in a game that means a lot to at least get you into the semifinals. So I think the one thing I've seen about McDaniel is they can play really good basketball. They can be up-tempo if they need to. They certainly have a decent defense, and they can shoot from outside. But if one of those things isn't quite working, they seem to get out of sorts a little bit. They took it to Hopkins to start the game in the first half back on the 18th. I thought they were playing pretty good basketball. And then the second half, it was all Hopkins. It's almost like the McDaniel Green Terror just kind of forgot to come out of halftime. So consistency is my worry with McDaniel, and you can see that even throughout the rest of the other season with some sporadic losses throughout there as well. Certainly agree with the adage, you got to come in hot, and I don't know if McDaniel's coming in hot right now. The only advantage I would see is maybe at some point you got to end a losing streak, and you got to figure Coach Curley's going to have that team fired up for that rematch against Gettysburg, especially since they got to go on the road to do it.
Brian, it's been a long time since F&M has seen McDaniel. I believe the second game was middle of January. The Diplomats have seen Gettysburg twice since then. What are your impressions of the Bullets?
I think with Gettysburg, they are a very hot and cold team. They're a team that can be very talented at times, and at other times they can look a little bit lost. And I think that's a factor of them being pretty young, but very quickly developing. I mean, they can distribute the ball extremely well. They have 4 players that get over 10 points per game. Kevin Gladstone, Peter Christ, Sean Gordon, and Tanner Kirkpatrick. Sean Gordon, I actually think, is probably one of the most underrated players in all of the Centennial Conference. I think that they are a team that really did themselves a lot of favors by winning that last game of the regular season in order to get to host a playoff game at home. McDaniel, a squad that is 3-9 on the road this year. As we've already said, very streaky. They had a 4-game winning streak, followed by a 4-game losing streak, followed by a 3-game winning streak, and then 3 to lose it at the end of the year. Gettysburg, I think they are dangerous, and quite frankly, this is such a stacked top 5 this season that if one of these two teams in the 4-5 matchup went on a run and somehow managed to win a couple of games in a row and came out on top, people would be surprised, but I don't know that they would be shocked given the talent that they have in both these two squads, particularly Gettysburg.
Connor, Tim Stewart is I'd say one of the top forwards certainly in the conference, a dominating force on the inside. Talk to me a little bit about what your perception is on Tim Stewart.
Yeah, Tim Stewart, saw him earlier this year, obviously, when he came to Chestertown, and we didn't have an answer for him in the inside. The way he's just able to beat and bang with guys on the inside, even against the best bigs in the conference, and just get to the basket and make his shots. And he doesn't have great rebounding numbers, but when you look at all the players in this league statistically, nobody's averaging double-digit rebounds per game, so he's still right up near the top because it's evenly spread. And he's the go-to guy for McDaniel in terms of scoring, but there's so many other guys that set him up too. You've got guys like Wes Brooks, second in the conference in steals, and then Phil Perry, a fellow senior, really giving him support as well. So Stewart is still the main guy that gets focused on, but there's enough depth there behind him that even if he draws extra defensive help, he'll still be able to have help, and McDaniel could thrive on it. I just don't know what's happened to this team in the last 3 games. Like I said earlier, they looked great earlier this year with a couple of upset wins, but they've really just kind of fallen apart here over the last week.
Dave, I know you look at McDaniel's backcourt. Andrew Merlot may have had not exactly your best statistical season, but he certainly lit up a couple games ago with 25. Wesley Brooks is a nice shooter from the outside. Is that what it's going to take for McDaniel to advance to play in the backcourt?
Yeah, I think they got to get that shooting on the outside fixed, for lack of a better description. You're right. I don't think Merlot's had the season statistically that a lot of people expected, only about 7.5 points a game. Brooks, you expect a lot of shooting from. He's averaging about 7 points a game, and I think that's been their downfall. They can't dominate on the outside in the shooting, which forces the defenses to not collapse into the center. It's amazing Tim Stewart's got 15.5 points a game considering how much attention he garners every single night. I think that pressure could be alleviated if Merlot and others, really, besides Brooks, certainly Royster and Perry too, can find ways to start hitting from outside. We know that if Merlot starts hitting, they're dangerous. If Brooks starts hitting, they're very dangerous. And, of course, Perugino, too, is one of those guys coming off the bench that if he catches fire, it changes the entire complexion. There were a couple games earlier this season where that outside shooting forced the defenses either into some type of zone to slow that down, or at least into a man-to-man extended out beyond the three-point line. That opened up passing lanes. That opened up inside presence. If for McDaniel, I think they need to find some confidence on the outside and start hitting some shots. If they can do it, it gives Tim Stewart some room inside to move, including grabbing offensive rebounds for second chance opportunities.
Brian, you guys have seen the Gettysburg offense, and when it clicks and everything works as a smooth, well-oiled machine, they can really put it to teams. As Franklin and Marshall suffered a loss at Gettysburg last Wednesday night, Kevin Gladstone has really stepped up in the middle and seems to be the man that makes the bullet offense go. What have you seen about Gladstone that you can share?
Yeah, Gladstone getting 13 points per game, a very good free throw shooter. He's a guy who can really bang down low, but if you need him to and if the situation dictates, he can step back and take a couple shots as well. I've really liked the way that he's been able to distribute the basketball to some of the other guards on the team, Gordon, Chris. I mean, with Gladstone still being just a junior, I don't think we've seen all that he has to offer quite yet, and I think that's a pretty scary proposition for a lot of these other conference schools. I really like the way he's sort of led as a junior. He has some good senior leadership around him, and knowing that they're going up against McDaniel team, 3 seniors, 12 juniors, a team that is really, quite frankly, pretty scary looking forward to next year, although definitely way too early to get to that point. I think that Gladstone's really going to have to step up and be the leader in this game. I think he's very capable of doing it, but quite frankly also, if they start to key in on him, knowing that there are other guys who can score on this squad, it's going to be a tricky evening for the Green Terror because you can't just shut down one guy and expect that you're going to be able to win. And Gladstone has shown that when they put their best defender on him, he can still score, he can still get to the rack, and he can get himself to the free throw line even when the shots aren't falling. But it's going to be a tough task in order to manage him and some of the other guys they have around him.
The winner of this one takes on Johns Hopkins in Friday night's second semifinal, scheduled tip-off 8 o'clock at Goldfarb Gym. Connor, you got to see the Blue Jays last Saturday, 22-3. Defending conference champion. Is this team the real deal?
Yeah, I think they are. And the top 3 teams, Hopkins, Dickinson, F&M, I've had the privilege to see all 3 of them come through Kane Athletic Center this year. And the Shoremen, they played Dickinson tough here the first time, and then they split with F&M this season. But whenever we played Hopkins this year, we just did not have an answer for the Blue Jays, either here at home or last Saturday we lost by, I think it was 30 in Baltimore. The Blue Jays are just good. They had that senior leadership. They're defending conference champions for a reason. Ranked in the top 15 in the country in the new D3 poll that just came out this week, along with Dickinson. And the senior leadership, Bugarinovich and Hammer, they really do carry that Blue Jays squad. One of the reasons why, against the other teams that are in the playoffs, 6-2 record against those other conference playoff teams, which is the best of any of the other 4 teams that are playing for the conference championship. So not only does Hopkins know how to take care of business, so to speak, against the other teams that didn't make the playoffs as they finished undefeated against the teams that didn't make it, but they also take care of business against the teams that are right in the mix with them. And save for, a split against, Dickinson and a split against Franklin and Marshall in games that were still very hotly contested, the Blue Jays showed that they were one of the classes of the league this year and one of the best teams in the country.
Dave, I think one of the things that goes unnoticed in some respects, you talk about George Bugarinovich, Jimmy Hammer probably get most of the attention, but 2 of the unsung heroes are probably Austin Vasiliadis at the point guard, and the Blue Jays really began to hit their stride when Ryan Kern moved into the starting lineup, enabled them to beat center, knock off regionally ranked Franklin and Marshall and Dickinson. What have you seen about the Blue Jays?
I called them a blue-collar team. In a white, in a school that you associate with more white collar, and I mean that is in all the respect possible. You've got this team that just goes out there and works and gets it done. They are subtly good. I saw them for the first. I've seen them a couple times this year on video, but then I got a chance to see them at Muhlenberg. And I'll tell you, I wasn't blown away by them. It wasn't anything that they were doing that went, oh my gosh, they got the best player here and they got the best player there, and they just run through it nonstop. I was more impressed. They go through it. They know what they're doing on offense. They know what they're going to do on defense. There's nothing flashy. There's really nothing flashy about Hammer in his shooting. There's nothing flashy about Bugarinovich inside. they just get the job done, and Bill Nelson can sit back sometimes and relax while they're methodical in what they do. And I think a great example of that was the McDaniel game. I mean, McDaniel came after them in that first half. It was a very emotional gym. Obviously, they wanted to see an upset of another top-ranked team coming in there. And by the time the second half rolled around, all of a sudden, guys have got points that I didn't even see coming. Bogdanovic, I think, had close to 20 points, if I remember correctly, at one point when I looked over at the stat sheet and couldn't believe what I was looking at. They're just methodical. And I think that's what makes them dangerous is, yeah, they've got guys like Hammer and Bogdanovic you're going to key on, but as you point out, Curran will step up and other guys will find ways to do things, and they don't panic. They just go through their sets, they run their systems, and they're very good on defense, subtly good on defense. Again, against Muhlenberg, they know Killing's going to do whatever Killing is going to do. They just made sure nobody else hurt him. And a great example was late in that game, they knew Killing was going to come down with the ball. Killing drove the lane, probably shouldn't have. They're probably looking for a three-pointer instead. None of the defense collapsed. They stayed on their men, so Killing had no options to go anywhere. I'm impressed by Hopkins, but at the same time leery about is there just that nothing seems to faze them, but nothing blows you out of the water about them either. How far that can take them, I don't know. I'll admit, as a top 25 voter, I've got them 14th. I still have them behind Dickinson. I thought about whether that was the right choice for this week, but I wanted to see what the Centennial playoffs presented because there are some things, because strength of schedule worries me, and I know we can talk about that another time, that maybe we haven't seen them truly tested, but they're a good squad.
Brian, you got to see Johns Hopkins recently at Mazer, and talking about what the job the defense did. Franklin Marshall held to, I believe it was 46 points. Brandon Federici, the top scorer in the conference, averaging about 19 a game, was really held in check by the Blue Jays. What impressed you about Johns Hopkins?
I think with Johns Hopkins, one of the things that has impressed me, well, first of all, it's very hard to poke holes in this team, because they have very few areas where they have weaknesses that are noticeable. As you already said, they're really deep, they're experienced, they have 4 seniors, 6 juniors, so even looking ahead to the future, they're going to have a next wave of leadership of guys that can step up and fill in for George Bogdanovic and for Jimmy Hammer. They have a lot of guys that have really impressed me. The thing that I've also been impressed by with them is they've had to win a couple of games down the stretch at the end were not necessarily going to 100% go their way. They had to come back. The first time they played McDaniel this season, McDaniel had them on the ropes in the second half, and they were able to fight their way back, win that game. They pulled out a 1-point victory over Swarthmore at Swarthmore, which everybody knows in the Centennial is just about the hardest place to win. They had to go on the road up here to the Mazer Center and beat F&M. That one went all the way down to the wire. It was a low-scoring game, and they were still able to win. They're a team that can score a lot of points, but they're a team that when they are well defensed, they can play good defense as well. They just have a lot of really good guys on that squad. I saw recently George Bogdanovic was named to the NABC Good Works team, so I don't know necessarily if that is of any real effect out there on the floor, but at least from up in the broadcast booth, it's nice to know that the guys that we're watching, they're good guys off the floor as well. They just go out there and get it done. They're lunch pail carrying, meat and potatoes type players sometimes, and I don't necessarily think they have to blow you away in order to be able to win. And having gone to the playoffs last year and having some experience, I think that only serves to their advantage as well.
You made a good point. In those games at Swarthmore and then at Gettysburg, Vasiliadis was out, so without their starting point guard, down 20 at Swarthmore, came back to win. Down 17 in the second half to Gettysburg and came back and win. So Johns Hopkins, the top seed, headed into this weekend's Centennial Conference tournament. My name is Steve Ulrich. I'm the executive director of the Centennial Conference, joined by Dave McHugh, Connor Flegel, and Brian Stabby. Unfortunately, technical difficulties are keeping us from having Doug Raftery join us from McDaniel and Tim McCarty from Johns Hopkins. Moving along to the the first semifinal, but the second one we'll be talking about, the rematch between Dickinson and Franklin and Marshall. Dickinson winning by 33 in Carlisle. Franklin and Marshall winning 2 days ago in Lancaster by 13. And let me start with Connor. Your perceptions as you look, first of all, at the matchups, and then a little bit later we'll go in to look at each of the teams. But one of the things we always talked about in the 5-team Centennial format, which sometimes people look at as a little bit askew, but number 2 and number 3 seeds are usually so close, sometimes we say this game should be decided on a neutral court.
Yeah, I agree. And, if you look at the records, identical records, 20-5 overall, 13-5 in conference play. And, 2 versus 3 as far as the playoffs go doesn't really matter. It's just basically what color jersey you're going to be wearing, what bench you're going to be sitting on. But this year was particularly interesting because to break the tie of who was 2 and who was 3, you had to go all the way down to the record against, I believe it was Ursinus, who was finished 6th or 7th in the league this year in order to break the tie between 2 and 3. So it's just one of those years where you talk about 2 teams that are dead even, and you have to go with a tiebreaker for a team that's not even in the playoffs. That's about as dead even as it gets. But that being said, going into Saturday's game for F&M, I wasn't quite ready to write off the Diplomats, but I was getting close. They started so well this year, 14-0, but the last 10 games before Saturday, just a 500 team at 5-5. They were struggling. Federici has been the leading scorer in the conference, and I believe he's still the leading freshman scorer in the country. But the last couple games, his shooting's been off, his scoring's been down. I don't know. Maybe he's feeling a little bit of that season fatigue or what. He had an article earlier this season where he mentioned that the first college game he ever played, he was tired by halftime because he wasn't used to all the minutes he's been logging. Now that he's played a full 25-game season, averaging 33, 34 minutes per game or so, I'm starting to wonder if he might be wearing down a little bit. But luckily for F&M on Saturday, Morgan Lee, the senior, the only senior on F&M's team, which is really scary, the fact that F&M finished 2nd in the regular season this year and only have 1 senior on the squad, so they return practically the entire team next year, plus whatever other freshman Coach Robinson might be able to get. We know he's great at recruiting, one of the best coaches ever. But just to have 1 senior in this team as young as they are, to still be 2nd in the conference, obviously Federici's a big part of that. And then Dickinson, almost the opposite, a very experienced team. Jerry Wickstead, one of the front runners for Player of the Year as a senior. Steve Collins, a senior. Ted Henningkamp has really stepped up his game this year for the Red Devils, a junior. And in games where, Wickstead has been ineffective, and Brandon Andrade, a 3-point shooter as well. He's really been one of the reasons why the Red Devils have been able to pull out some of these games they have. They sit at 13-5, but there's a lot of those games where even though they're 9-1 against teams that haven't made the tournament, they're pulling out these games by less than 5, and or games that might be decided by 10, but it was a 3-point game up until the final minute, such as the game across the hall here earlier this year. We had them within 1 point with a minute to go, and then we couldn't make a basket there at the end. It's just that senior leadership for the Red Devils is big. It's something that F&M doesn't have, but I think F&M has been able to make up for it on talent. And it's just the last couple years, we've been talking about Dickinson and F&M as 1 and 2 in the conference, and now it's ironic this year they're tied with the same overall record, tied with the same conference record, but yet we're not really necessarily getting them as much publicity because Hopkins has just been, not so much better, but they've been more consistent this year. The 17-game win streak for the Blue Jays. And when's the last time that a team coached by Glenn Robinson didn't have extremely high expectations coming into a season? Because usually we're thinking about, F&M, not necessarily conference championship or bust, but they've had such good players in the past like McNally's and Milligans. It's almost what you expect. But this year, they were picked 3rd to finish 3rd in the league this year. They weren't getting a lot of as much publicity as Hopkins was, the defending champions, and then Dickinson, ranked in the top 10 in the country to start the year. But I don't think anyone quite knew what we were in store for when Brandon Federici first stepped onto a college basketball court. And he's really turned that team around this year, and is one of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reason, why they're sitting where they are.
Why don't we continue talking about the 2nd seed Diplomats? Dave, you and I had the opportunity to sit down beside each other and watch the Richard Stockton game. I think that was probably a bellwether moment for the Diplomats season, knocking off number 4 ranked Stockton at that point. And as Connor mentioned, they've had some bumps in the road along the way. A complete surprise to you and the Division III hoops.com poll voters this year?
Yeah, I think, to be honest with you, the conference was a surprise to top 25 voters this year. Furthermore, I would say that while that was a big win over Richard Stockton, the Osprey were heading in the opposite direction to some extent. They're now 20-5 as well. Having lost their point guard, they're still trying to find themselves, I think, a little bit. I think F&M got the opportunity to take advantage of that, and well done. Though, as you and I witnessed, F&M nearly blew a big lead and nearly blew the game. And I think that's what the big factor for the Diplomats with a lot of top 25 voters is who is this F&M squad? If you look at it especially, I think what's very telling is the fact that they're playing, forgive the phrase, especially with the NCAA, they're playing with house money. Glenn Robinson did not think he'd have this good a squad in any way, shape, or form. When I talked to him shortly after you and I were sitting together, he couldn't believe the season they were having. You're right, it's a freshman in Federici who's stepped up. There's other guys, underclassmen, who have stepped up. They were still searching for basically their starting lineup earlier in the season, and they did roll through. They got a win over a testy New Jersey City team this year. They got Hopkins early in the season. I think that's when everybody maybe took a little bit more notice. Of course, they weren't sure how good the Blue Jays could possibly be this season. But it was also hard to understand who the Diplomats were because they played a below-average Albright team, and I mean for their standards. Usually Albright's a pretty good team, not having the greatest of seasons this year. The win over Immaculata was okay, but Richard Stockton finally got them some attention, and then they kept winning, and they kept winning, and they kept winning, and I think that finally got everybody's attention. But that being said, it is a crazy year this year in Division III across the country. And I think a lot of top 25 voters, including myself, have been searching for who are the top 25 teams. And it has been anything but easy. I'm looking at 40 teams myself almost every week to figure out how to squeeze into 25. And I've been hot and cold on F&M all season. I certainly was cold to start with, didn't know how much to buy into it. Then I saw them in person, saw them beat Richard Stockton, and went, okay, maybe they are better than I thought. Rode them for a little while. Then they hit a stretch and went, I don't know if I can ride them anymore. Then I rode them again. Now I'm not riding them anymore, and I debated about riding them again this season or this week, and I decided to go somewhere else. Honestly, it's about picking just who are the bottom 10 teams in that top 25. I think the key for them right now is they got that big win over Dickinson. They can't rest on those laurels. I know it was only for a jersey color. They weren't going to be playing at home, but they can't expect that 69-53 victory is anything they're going to see come Friday. They can't expect that the 81-48 loss is anything that anybody's going to see later in the season. I am more leery that 81-48 loss is more of what we might catch on Friday. Not score, but just Dickinson playing better. I don't know why Dickinson didn't seem to show up at the last game, but I worry that the Diplomats' youth and Federici playing minutes, that's a great point by Connor. I worry if that is going to be a major factor in this game coming up, where you got to shorten maybe that bench just a little bit to try and guarantee yourself in. And in my opinion, and maybe you'll talk about this later, I think F&M needs to win this game to position themselves as best as possible for a potential at-large bid. I think there's less pressure on Dickinson in that category, though I think Dickinson needs to win as well. But I really think F&M needs to win because that Washington College loss is still kind of looming a little bit on their record, and their SOS is not all that, strength of schedule is not all that great. I think F&M needs to win this, but they might come out a little not gun shy. They might come out a little lighter than they normally would because they just got that win over Dickinson. I think those are tough. When you're playing a team you just beat, to get up and expect to be able to play the same way you played the week before is tough for teams.
Brian, we had a chance to watch Franklin Marshall and Dickinson on Saturday, completely different outcome than we saw middle of January. Dickinson jumped out to an early lead at the Klein Center. F&M clawed back within 5, and then Dickinson just got on a roll and outscored Franklin Marshall 20-5 and really put the game away. You look at Saturday, and Coach Robinson made a change to the starting lineup, and it seemed to have a positive effect.
Yeah, going with Hunter Eggers and his first collegiate start over Devin Figueroa, and it was a gutsy move, but boy, did it ever pay off. Figueroa came in off the bench and shot just about as good as he has all season. Yeah, I was really impressed by that decision to go with the change in the starting lineup, and I think it's one where if it didn't work out, you'd be scratching your head, but you can't right now because it went about as well as it possibly could have. And it was a game where it wasn't so much Dickinson didn't play poorly; they played very well, but F&M just seemed ready for them. And they knew that they were going to be going in that 2-3 game. It was going to be at a neutral site, and like you said, it was really just about the jersey color and the bench you're sitting on for the game in next Friday. And my broadcast partner made the quip that the only time it matters who's wearing white is at a wedding. But I think for F&M, they came in with the attitude saying, listen, we took a loss in the last time out on the road at Gettysburg. We'd like to have a little bit of momentum and a little bit of confidence going into the Centennial Conference tournament. Let's go out there and get a win. And they really just took care of business. And I think you guys have really summed up sort of this season really well. Obviously, I've had the opportunity to watch them all season long, and it has been really fun listening to Coach Robinson in that preview video that he did with the conference, saying, you know, we had a bad practice. I'd be surprised if we even won a game this year. He's a guy who you take him at his word. He's not one of these undersellers, but I think he's surprised with the way that this team has turned out. Finishing strong at home against Dickinson, I think, is going to be huge. But this team is more than just Brandon Federici. Morgan Lee has had just a transformative season. The jump he's made from his junior year to his senior year has been a bigger jump in terms of offensive production over that time frame of any player that this team has had in the last decade. Other freshmen contributing. Matthew Tate starting at the point guard position. He's leading the conference in steals. They're shooting the heck out of the ball from beyond the arc with Figueroa and some of these other guys as well. And I'm impressed with the fact that they've been able to do it sort of with a lot of question marks coming in. They've beaten 3 top 25 schools, 2 of whom are in the Centennial Conference, and as you said, Richard Stockton, who's #1 in their region. So beating 2 top-ranked regional teams, I think, has certainly got to help that resume a little bit. And I know that they went on the road and took a couple of losses later in the season. They lost to McDaniel on the road, a game where they actually lost Matthew Tate for the second half of that game and had to play without him. And I think that hurt down the stretch. But I don't know, if you look at their resume, it's very similar to Dickinson's in terms of the number of losses, the wins that they've had. Dickinson had a win over a non-conference top 25 team in North Central, who I guess has since dropped out of the top 25. But it's I think the pieces are there. Early on in the season, they were down 23 to Keystone, and they were able to come back on the road. That's the type of game where maybe your inexperience helps you because you haven't been in the situation before and you don't know that you're not supposed to win those games. Later on in the season, they lost here at home against Johns Hopkins, a game where some senior leadership from the Blue Jays might have helped them come back in that game. But this team has been really exciting, and I think they're sort of building momentum. They took a couple of late-season losses, but that win against Dickinson, a team that really blew them out at the Klein Center, has really got to help them and feel a little bit of swagger as they go into that conference tournament this year.
Connor, let's talk about the Dickinson Red Devils, 2013 Centennial champion, runner-up to Johns Hopkins a year ago, made a run through the NCAA tournament to the Elite Eight before finally being ousted by Illinois Wesleyan. One of the telling things you see this year is certainly Jerry Wickstead, certainly a candidate for Player of the Year. But alongside him, there's a lot of height that Dickinson brings to the forefront, and certainly I would say they're probably the tallest team in the conference, and that's going to present problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And the real scary thing about Dickinson is, Steve Collins, you mentioned one of the tall guys, 6'10". I've seen him step out 2-3 feet behind the arc and shoot threes just like he's a 5'10" point guard, which is scary for any team. The fact that Wickstead, who's such a great forward at 6'5", 6'6", can do it on a consistent basis as it is scary enough. But along with Collins, Ted Henninkamp, I mentioned him earlier, sort of a guard-forward combo. at times played like a forward who was much, much bigger than he actually is during the season, and really helped pick up the Red Devils on nights where, Wickstead might have been off a little bit, or where Brandon Andrade might have gone 1 for 8 or 1 for 9 from 3-point range. He really stepped in and helped them. And a guy, Robert Pick, I believe he's a sophomore for the Red Devils. He came in during a couple games this year. Big, tall guy, about as tall as Collins is, and really gave the Red Devils solid minutes off the bench when they needed him to. Dickinson, they're graduating a lot of height this year. Wickstead leaves, Collins leaves, but I think they've got a couple guys behind that can step in. And the Red Devils are going to need that when they go up against F&M. Cedric Monet, one of the best rebounders in the conference. In fact, the best rebounder in the conference, averaged double digits per game, rebounding all year up until the very last game or two. He dropped just below that double-double average per game threshold, but still an outstanding rebounder. So the Red Devils are going to need to have that height with F&M because Monet can bang. Morgan Lee can get down there every now and then and provide some solid play in the post when he has to. And then Hunter Eggers, we mentioned him going into the starting lineup on Saturday. I think he's young, but this might be the time where he steps up. F&M, we said they have the youth while Dickinson has the veteran leadership. This is the time of year where maybe one of those freshmen or sophomores makes the big leap on the big stage because, as Dave mentioned, I think F&M has an outside shot of making the tournament, but I think they really need to beat Dickinson this weekend to have consideration because if they do lose to the Red Devils and the Red Devils jump a game ahead, they're already ahead of F&M in the regional rankings. I think it'll be hard for the Centennial to get 3 teams in if F&M can't find a way to pull out this win.
Dave, we look at the Red Devils, and you have Ted Hinnenkamp playing point guard at 6'6". You had certainly Wickstead at 6'8", Collins at 6'10". Brandon Andrade, an excellent three-point shooter, really took the game over against North Central earlier in December. But one of the unsung players, I think, for Dickinson, someone that really brings a lot of life to that team, is Chris Cox. You've had a chance to see Dickinson. Your thoughts on the Red Devils?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've only been able to see him on video, but you certainly had to take a look at him. I mean, when we're talking about the fact that the team's been in my top 10 for forever, a little bit different than last year. I mean, I think they're more of a team this year. That's nothing against last year and how well they played last year. I just mean that I think that sometimes when you lose a key player, you end up becoming a much better full unit. And you do look at Dickinson, and they got a lot of weapons, and Cox certainly is, I think, one of those subtle ones. He doesn't put up a lot of points, but he can at least, he's still getting 4 rebounds a game. He's averaging 2 assists a game. He's got a few steals here and there, but sometimes you just need a glue guy, and he comes across as a glue guy, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. But what jumps out at me about Dickinson is they're good free throw shooters. As a team, they're 76.5% in something in college basketball, especially the Division III level. I've noticed a lot that's a really good number when that might have been just an average number in some years past. But of the 10 guys who played more than 20 games this season, 6 of them are shooting 80% or better. That's dangerous late in games. You got to start picking your poison correctly, because if you need to get in a fouling situation, Dickinson's going to have guys. Now, Cox, interesting enough, is one of those guys who doesn't shoot free throws all that well at 63%. But, Wickstead is at 82, 86% for Andrade. Hinnenkamp is 77%. Collins, 82%. Melton is at 68, Cox 63, Picca 64, but then you get Yingst in there. When he plays, he's got 85%. That's a dangerous scenario, and I think that's something that Dickinson took advantage of last year to make tournament runs. When they got in tight situations and the points were going to come at the line, they took advantage of that. They took advantage of that against North Central, and yes, they've fallen out of the top 25 in a really competitive CCIW this year. Well, those are the types of wins that Dickinson was able to get, and that's what surprises you in a game like Franklin and Marshall, that they couldn't take advantage of opportunities to get themselves to the free throw line necessarily in that game on Saturday. And I think you get into a free throw shooting game with Dickinson, they're going to have an advantage, especially when you got guys as young as Franklin and Marshall have, who, yes, they can shoot free throws, but now there's a little added pressure.
Guys, we've had a good conversation about the men's tournament for the last 40 minutes, and now it's prediction time. Let's start with the first round game, McDaniel and Gettysburg. Brian?
I'm going to have to go at Gettysburg, just knowing that McDaniel's struggled on the road the way that they have, having to go on the road, not at a neutral site. I just have liked what I've seen out of Gettysburg, and I'm a little skeptical and a little, bringing into question a little bit the way that McDaniel plays when they have to travel, and I think that Gettysburg's got the pieces there to win that contest.
And let's follow that up in the semifinal, Gettysburg against Johns Hopkins.
I think it's hard to pick anyone but Johns Hopkins, especially in a 1-4 matchup there.
Connor, let's start with Gettysburg and McDaniel.
Yeah, I'm with Brian on this one. McDaniel, for whatever reason, as the way with a lot of teams are, just a completely different team when they get out of Westminster and go on the road. And Gettysburg, we mentioned, Kevin Gladstone, a reigning conference player of the week. The Bullets have 4 guys that are averaging between 13.5 and 11 points per game, all 4 of their starters. So it's not just one player that you have to key on. Every single guy in that starting lineup, Kevin Gladstone, Sean Gordon, Pete Christ, and Tanner Kirkpatrick, who stands 6'7", 6'8", could give McDaniel some tough problems there on the inside. So combine that with the fact Green Terror have been struggling going into the playoffs. They're not good on the road. I don't see how Gettysburg can lose this game.
We'll go back and ask a question. The semifinal then, Gettysburg and Johns Hopkins.
It's like Brian said, it's hard to pick against Hopkins. We just went on for 5 to 10 minutes about how great of a team they are. And, they're 10-2 at home this year. Their only loss was to Franklin Marshall, and the other loss was an early season non-conference loss. But that loss came before a 17-game win streak the Blue Jays put together. And I really think Gettysburg, as Brian said earlier, if one of the teams that are in the 4 or 5 matchup made a run, it wouldn't be surprising with the way the league has beat each other up this year. But I don't see how. I think Gettysburg, I think they can keep it close, but I don't see a way how Hopkins loses that game.
Dave, let's turn it to you. Gettysburg, McDaniel.
I'm going to be the outsider and say McDaniel. I think there's something about this Green Terrace squad with Coach Curley. He can somehow motivate these guys. It's nothing against the last game, and I'll take the page I took out of F&M versus Dickinson. Sometimes it's tough to see a team the second time in a week and not expect it to go the same way the second time. I've seen quite a few of those over my years, especially in this region. So I'm going to take McDaniel mainly because I think they're going to be a little fired up and ticked off. I think their senior class is going to want to prove something, and I think Coach Curley's going to have them ready. I think Gettysburg's going to be kind of expecting more of the same. Low-scoring affair. I think this time McDaniel turns that around and gets the victory.
Certainly sets up for an interesting semifinal then between McDaniel and Johns Hopkins.
Yeah, I got to go with Johns Hopkins here. There's just no way. It has nothing to do with the fact that Jersey's hanging on a chair behind me. It's Goldfarb Gymnasium, plain and simple. And Johns Hopkins is tough to beat at their place, especially when they are playing well. Nothing against how McDaniel might get into that game, and nothing about anybody else getting into that game, including Gettysburg. But Hopkins has lost once at home or twice at home, and they were both in November. They have held Goldfarb down since then, and I just don't see how they're not going to be ready for that Friday game. They've been wanting to play that game at home for a long time. I think Goldfarb is going to be rocking. And I expect Hopkins to win that semifinal.
Let's move on and talk about the semifinal between Dickinson and Franklin and Marshall. Ignore the background as I asked Brian for his opinion.
Well, yeah, how could you make any sort of assumption there? I'm gonna go. Ignoring the background, I'm still gonna go with F&M. I really liked what I saw in the last time out between F&M and Dickinson. I think this is a squad that has learned how to play in those types of games. And the one thing I think with Dickinson is they're a team that's able to score a lot. They average over 70 points per game, I think about 73 per game. But in their 5 losses, 4 of which have come on the road, they're averaging under 60 points, I think about 58 points per game. So F&M is a team that is defense first. They're very focused on getting things done at the defensive end, making stops, and then using that to develop into setting up their offense. And I think that in that type of game that I think we're going to see, F&M is well suited. I think it is, you could say it's a coin toss, but I like what I've seen, and I'm going to have to go with the Diplomats here.
Let's go to Chestertown and Connor. Without a dog in the fight, your thoughts on Dickinson, Franklin, and Marshall?
Yeah, I'm used to not having a dog in the fight when it comes to these conversations by now. Up until even about a half hour before we started, I went back and forth on who I thought was going to win this game. As we've mentioned, two very evenly matched teams, but when it comes down to it in the end, Brandon Federici might be one of the best players in the conference, but when it comes down to it, I don't think. Sorry, Brian, but I don't think that there is, an exception for senior leadership, and that's something that Dickinson has. Guys like Wickstead and Collins and Hanningkamp, we've mentioned it. I think they'll be a little bit more poised because I think that Dickinson realizes that if they do lose this game, not only do they not have a chance to play for the conference championship, but there's a very good chance that if Dickinson doesn't find a way to win this game and F&M does, F&M might be able to sneak in there and get that second bid for the Centennial Conference for the NCAA tournament in the event that all three teams don't get in. So I think Dickinson seniors, they went to the Elite Eight last year. They want to try to make another deep run this year, and I think that starts with them in their semifinal against F&M this weekend. And we'll see what Andrade can do from the three-point line. As we know, he's the best in the conference as far as makes, but he's been hot and cold. Wickstead, he wants to go out with a bang, and I really think in a very, very close matchup, Dickinson, they're stinging from that loss they took Saturday. I know they've had problems in Lancaster, but Dickinson, I think they'll be ready for that game, and they'll be ready. It'll be a close game, but the Red Devils will win.
Before we go over to Dave McHugh, I just want to welcome Doug Raftery, who's joining us. Doug has done a lot of McDaniel games this year, and we're going to bring him into the conversation right after we talk to Dave about Dickinson and Franklin and Marshall.
I got to go with Dickinson on this one. Back to that adage, it's tough to beat the team when you just played them again. The other thing I think that's a big key is it's not at the Mazer Center, and this is going to be at Goldfarb, and I think that takes a little bit of the aura and the whatever you want to call it from F&M out of the equation. I mean, listen, it's tough to win on anybody's home court. It's very tough for F&M to lose on their home court, and I think F&M has been suspect on the road more than anything. But I really think Dickinson is you talk about senior leadership, Connor, I think they come out with the fact that, hey, we can't let that happen. If we want to make the NCAA tournament, we know we need to get this job done. Of the two, I think Dickinson is in a safer position, as I've mentioned in the past. I'm not saying they're in by any stretch. I think both teams need a win to secure that, but Dickinson is certainly better regionally ranked. Granted, we haven't seen the regional rankings from this week just yet. I think F&M's got to do just a little bit more with such a low strength of schedule that they need to win. But I think there's something about Dickinson and that senior leadership, as Connor pointed out, and they got lots of weapons. Federici's good, but he's not the only thing that F&M needs to win, and I don't know if they have that other thing necessarily. And you got to be kidding me if Alan Soretti's not going to have a message to his squad after that game on Saturday about winning it on Friday and getting to that conference championship. Dickinson also is going to be looking at its history from last year. They rested kind of on their laurels just a little bit, I think, in the conference championship game and lost to Hopkins. Got into the tournament, luckily, but I think that's going to be something Alan Soretti kind of falls back to his team. Hey, guys, we need to win, plain and simple. And the youth of F&M may not appreciate what that really means, while the experience of Dickinson will. So I got Dickinson winning that semifinal.
Now, before we jump ahead and ask for the championship prediction, let's bring in Doug to get his thoughts on the Green Terror McDaniel, how you think things are going to match up against Gettysburg, and then your prediction for not only the first round game, the winner of that one against Johns Hopkins, and your thoughts on Dickinson and Franklin and Marshall.
Sure, yeah, good to join you guys. Sorry about some technical difficulties on my end. But obviously, when it comes to the Green Terror on the men's side, this is obviously a game that was just played at Gettysburg, and McDaniel, the men's side this year, not the strongest of years on the road. They've played much better at home this season, so losing that pretty much what you can call almost a play-in game to play at home, I think that was a tough one to swallow for them. But at the same time, you take a look at that game, just a few days ago, and the result of it, they were able to chip on down to a 9-point deficit late in the half, in the second half. And I think Gettysburg actually plays the type of game the Princeton offense, that slow running offense, the type of defense that McDaniel likes to play against. So obviously the Green Terror are hoping for some revenge in in that respect. As for going into that next round, Johns Hopkins is a good team. They talking with Tim Murray, my broadcast partner with the Green Terror, we both about midway through the season thought that Hopkins was going to take the regular season championship, and we luckily proved to be semi right. But they're a very good team. They're very tough to guard. I think they have a chance to take it all. Not only regular season obviously, but in the conference tournament time. I think the biggest threat to them is going to be Franklin and Marshall. I know they've been a bit inconsistent, but I like that win that they had in the last game of the season against Dickinson. I think that proves that they have what it takes, and they have a lot of confidence, and having Brandon Federici doesn't hurt as well.
No one tell Doug who we picked.
I think what we'll do now is we'll ask our esteemed panel to pick your 2015 Centennial Conference champion. We'll start with Brian.
Oh boy, put me on the spot. Why don't you? I think F&M goes up against Johns Hopkins, and heart of hearts, I hope Coach Robinson's able to hoist that trophy. I think again it's very hard to pick against a team like Johns Hopkins, so we'll just call it a coin flip, I think.
We understand how difficult it is to choose against your alma mater in this situation, Brian. Hey, Connor, what do you think?
Well, I don't even have F&M making the final. Sorry, Brian, but I think Hopkins and Dickinson, we've already seen them split a pair of meetings this year. Dickinson just got the rematch in Carlisle by 2, but when they played in Baltimore earlier this year, Hopkins beat Dickinson by 12, and I don't want to say they made it look easy, but they made it look like they weren't challenged for most of that game. Dickinson made a little run at the start of the second half before Hopkins won the big run, and then just kind of cruised the rest of the way. It's hard to pick against guys who have had great careers like a Jerry Wickstead, but at the same time, Jimmy Hammer's had just as good, if not a better, career for the Blue Jays. He's the front runner for Player of the Year, I think, along with George Bugarinovic for the Blue Jays. I think Hopkins is deep along with Dickinson. It's a matchup of two very good, very deep teams, but in the end they're playing in Goldfarb, and I've been to visiting games there as a broadcaster and as a fan for Washington, and I could say, just like our gym where it's so small and the fans are close to the court, Hopkins is the same way. I think they'll be out in full force and they'll make it tough for the Red Devils, and for the second year in a row, Hopkins is going to win and prove why they have been the best team all season long.
Dave McHugh.
Oh, I got Washington College winning it all. No.
I wish, Dave. I wish.
How funny it would have been if Dickinson had gotten that win over Ursinus. The tiebreaker would have come down to the fact that F&M had lost to Washington College. I think Connor would have had a little more fun with that.
That might have been the bright spot of our season next to actually, which might have been the greatest broadcast of my life to this point.
I think it's the best spot of the season period. Once again, Washington College proving that they can beat anybody, especially on their court. I think it's going to be Hopkins to win. Nothing against Dickinson. Hopkins, we talked about it. I said blue collar, and then I don't remember if it was Connor or someone else who said, it's that bucket mentality, the lunch bucket mentality. That's literally what it is. And you're at Goldfarb, and the place is going to be rocking. Dickinson certainly doesn't have anything to lose, I don't think. I think they make the NCAA tournament no matter what. But they do have could miss out on hosting. So there's certainly some of that in play. But I got to go with Hopkins. Jimmy Hammer is just too cool, for lack of a better description. Nothing seems to faze him. Bogdanovic inside is certainly terrific and subtly good. And they've got other weapons. And I think Dickinson's going to have an emotional win over F&M the night before that might tax them just a little bit. It's going to be a great coaching matchup, Alan Soretti versus Bill Nelson. But honestly, if it was Glenn Robinson versus Alan Soretti and Glenn Robinson versus Bill Nelson, or Bill Nelson versus Glenn Robinson, it's a great coaching matchup amongst the three of them. Nothing against Curley, who I have in that other semifinal, but even he would probably tip his hat to those other three. But I'm going to go with Johns Hopkins. I think that being at home is something they fought hard to get. And as I said, they haven't lost at home since they lost to F&M back on November 25th, and they are a far better team now than they were in November.
Doug.
Yeah, and this has really nothing to do with my prediction. However, remember that McDaniel did defeat then two top 10 teams, so they have the power to do so. They're a team that certainly gets up and energetic for big games, so don't count them out. However, that being said, I think it's going to be an F&M and Hopkins, going at it at the very least. I agree with Dave. Talk about Jimmy Hammer. The thing that impresses me most about Jimmy Hammer is that he gets his points and he'll be topping the league and this and that, but he doesn't force anything. And he has so many different complementing players like Bogdanovich and just so many different guys. They don't only go 5 deep, but they go 8, 9 very good deep to their bench. And I think that's just something that you can't compare to any other team. I think depth is something that comes down to come tourney time, and I think Hopkins has that, all to themselves there.
We're going to wrap up our men's conversation with our panel. I'd ask if they might be able to voice their opinion on the 2015 Centennial Conference Player of the Year. I believe we're planning to announce the men's all-conference team next Tuesday. We'll go right down the line. We'll start with Brian. Your choice for Player of the Year.
I think historically the Conference Player of the Year in the Centennial has been both a senior and from the team that wins the conference in the regular season. I think that would lend you to think it could either be Jimmy Hammer or George Bogdanovich, but I have to go with Jerry Wickstead. He has just been an absolute monster. And I know that it's not necessarily supposed to be your entire body of work. It's supposed to be Player of the Year. I think he arguably could have been the best player on his own team last year when Adam Honig took that award home as the senior. But yeah, I got to go with Wickstead. He's just been such a terror to watch. He's one of those players that I know that opponents in the conference, they're going to tip their cap to him on a great career that he's had, but be very thankful that they don't ever have to see him play ever again after the season's over.
A lot of graduation cards are going to be sent his way. Absolutely. Connor.
Yeah, I would be hard-pressed to go against Wickstead as well. In most other years, I would say that Federici from Franklin Marshall has an outstanding chance of winning. The conference's leading scorer, one of the top scorers in the country. But the fact of the matter is, and Steve, you would know this, I did a little bit of research myself, I believe no freshman has ever won Conference Player of the Year, and only 2 sophomores have ever won it. Mm-hmm. Alex Kraft from Franklin Marshall about 15 years ago, and then Andrew Powers at Gettysburg won it as a sophomore, and those two were just out of this world talent-wise. If a guy like Giorgio Milligan made from F&M, Brian, made first-team all-conference all 4 years, I don't even think he got any consideration for Player of the Year when he was a freshman. Mm-hmm. So Federici, outstanding season, tip of the cap to him. Not only does the kid score, he dishes the ball out well. He can block shots. He's 5th in the conference of block shots for a guard, which is, for someone who stands 6'3", 6'4", not something you see a whole lot of. And I think he's already probably the front runner for Player of the Year next year with the group that F&M has coming back. But it's hard to pick against the upperclassmen on the team that finishes 1st or 2nd in the league. And Jerry Wickstead's had a great career, and I think at this point it's his award to lose because of the fact of what he's done actually against the conference's playoff teams this year. He scores right around 17 points per game for the season overall. He ups that to 18.5 points per game and 8.5 rebounds when you look at the 8 games he's played against the other playoff teams, while Hammer, on the other hand, only scores 12 points a game, doesn't even shoot 30% from three-point range in the games that he's played against the other conference playoff teams this year. So when you look at that, and the whole body of work in general, I think it's Wickstead's award to lose.
Dave, you've had the opportunity to see some of the Centennial's best players from afar. You've seen them in person once or twice. Your thoughts on our conversation about the Conference Player of the Year on the men's side?
Listen, I think F&M is not in its position where it is if it's not for Federici and his points, but I don't know if it necessarily, and I agree, goes to him as Player of the Year. I think a lot of coaches will tell you that F&M was tougher this year because of Federici. I think they're going to tell you that F&M is the number 2 team if it's not for Federici. But I think they're also going to turn around and say, listen, if it's not for Jimmy Hammer on Hopkins, they're not in first place. And if it's not for Wickstead on Dickinson, Dickinson's not having the season to repeat what they did last year. I think it's a three-horse race. It's going to be tough. I could see a lot of votes going a lot of different ways. I think I'm going to take an opposite end. I've been literally sitting here toying it over for the last 20 minutes. It came down to Wickstead and Hammer for me, and I'm going to go with Hammer. And I'm just going to go with it because they are the first-place team, and if there isn't a guy you're keying on for Hopkins more than Hammer, it's certainly Bungarinovich, but it's Hammer, and it's Hammer, and it's Hammer, and it's Hammer, and he's going to kill you in a lot of different ways. I wouldn't be surprised if Wickstead gets it. He certainly would deserve it, but I think because Hopkins is in first and because Hopkins has been so good the whole season, I think Hammer might get the recognition on a team that has a lot of depth. And he would probably be the first guy to tell you he's not even the best guy on the team, but I think Hammer might get it.
Doug, round out our panel. Who do you think's the Centennial Men's Player of the Year for 2015?
Sure. Listen, I know Dave pretty well, and I know Dave picked Jimmy Hammer just because no one else is going to, all right?
But I don't know what he's talking
but
about.
So here's my deal. It's as simple as this. I believe that Jerry Wickstead should win. And this is for the simple fact of just speaking with some of the coaches in the league and kind of talking with them and just small talk of top guys in the league and their thoughts on upcoming games and who they're most worried about and why they're worried about them. That's the name. He's the one who comes up the most. And that's a story within itself. When a coach says a name without you even mentioning the name, that's something pretty special. Coach Curley with McDaniel as well. He's surprised that Jerry Wickstead doesn't average 30 points a game. Such a big body, such a special talent. I'm just a big fan of Jerry Wickstead, but I think it come down to a tight race. But I'm going with the Dickinson big man.
You're watching the Centennial Conference playoff preview for the 2015 Conference Basketball Championship, which gets underway on the men's side Wednesday night, first round game, McDaniel at Gettysburg. Final Four takes place Friday and Saturday in Baltimore on the campus of Johns Hopkins University. The McDaniel-Gettysburg winner will take on Johns Hopkins in the second semifinal beginning at 8 o'clock. Friday night's first semifinal will be between Franklin and Marshall and Dickinson. That game slated for a 6 p.m. tip. Saturday's championship game slated for a 7 o'clock start. If you'd like tickets, you can order them beginning 9 o'clock Tuesday morning by calling the Johns Hopkins University. The phone number is 410-516-7490. And we'll repeat that a little later in the broadcast. As we said, you're watching the Centennial Conference Basketball Playoff Preview. My name is Steve Ulrich. I'm the Executive Director of the conference. If you're watching us live, thanks for joining us. If you're watching the replay, we're glad you stuck around this long. Joined by an esteemed panel of 4 excellent basketball minds: Doug Raftery from McDaniel, Connor Flegel from Washington College, and Brian Stabby from Franklin and Marshall. Also joined by Dave McHugh from D3Hoops.com and the host of Hoopsville, Division III basketball talk show host. We're thrilled to have you all here. And let's turn our attention to the women's playoff right now. Women's tournament gets underway tomorrow night with a 7 o'clock tip on the main line. Gettysburg travels to Haverford. The winner of that matchup will take on the top seed McDaniel College Green Terror Friday night in the Gill Center in Westminster. That game slated for a 6 o'clock start. The other semifinal, 8 o'clock in Westminster, Muhlenberg against Johns Hopkins. And we're going to work backwards with our panel this time. We're going to start with Doug. And Doug, you got a chance to see Haverford. Haverford gave McDaniel 2 great games. Gettysburg McDaniel games are always great. How do you view the first round matchup between the Bullets and the Fords?
I think advantage for me, at least from what I've seen. I go advantage Forts. And I think talent-wise, they're a bit more there. I'm not sure how they did against each other during the regular season. Don't have that right in front of me. But I think for McDaniel, you'd rather play Gettysburg for sure. I think it's a team that you've done very well against this year. Although a rival, I think the type of team that Gettysburg is, and the type of defense that McDaniel plays, that tight man-to-man defense, kind of forced Gettysburg into a lot of turnovers.
I think
think we lost
unfortunately, I think Doug froze there for a moment, so hopefully he'll be able to. We'll be able to get him back on and hear his thoughts on the Green Terror. Dave, your thoughts on the women's matchup? The first round matchup pits the last two Centennial Conference champions, Gettysburg and Haverford, both which had just a taste of success at the national level in the last two tournaments.
Yeah, this has been an interesting year on the women's side. I think I expected a little bit more out of it, and it just didn't materialize. You look at a Gettysburg squad that's lost 3 of its last 5. They had a huge 5-game slide right in the middle of the season, which included a pretty big loss to Haverford, 59-33, and then they lost 70-56 in the return match. Of course, that second one was on the road. I'm not sure Gettysburg's got the firepower this year. It's not that Haverford has had a tremendous season either. They started with a 3-game losing streak. They lost 3 out of 5. And as you cross the new year, they then had another 3-game losing streak, which culminated with McDaniel, and they just lost to Swarthmore recently. But the game, again, at Haverford, Gettysburg's been struggling quite a bit this year. I don't know if this is as good as it looks on paper. I don't even know if it looks good on paper. Again, Haverford has dominated Gettysburg twice. It is always hard to beat a team 3 times in a season. You'll hear that a lot. You'll hear that a lot this week across the country. I just don't think Gettysburg's got the ability there. I think Barbara Morgan's got a pretty talented squad there in Haverford, and I think the matchups just don't go Gettysburg's way.
I'm back here and see. I think we might have Doug back. Doug?
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. I want to give you the chance to finish your thoughts on the Green Terror.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'll second everything Dave pretty much just said. The one thing I was finishing up, not sure if it got on through, but McDaniel would for sure rather have Gettysburg, rather than Haverford. It's been much easier against Gettysburg this year. For the Green Terror. So it's one of those things where you'd rather have, if you want to call it the rivalry, Gettysburg McDaniel matchup. If you're the Green Terror, they seem much more comfortable. They force much more turnovers than a Haverford team that has played them pretty tough. So I think advantage Haverford in that first round game for sure. However,
let's head on over to Lancaster. Brian, your thoughts on the first round game between Gettysburg and Haverford, the team that you think is going to advance, and then the matchup against McDaniel.
I think in that play-in or the 4-5 game, Haverford really stands out as a team that is going to go in sort of fired up. They get it at home. They're a veteran squad, 4 seniors, 5 juniors. They have some players that are just so tremendously talented. Liz Lynch getting 12 points per game. She's shooting 30% from beyond the arc. Jackie Pizzuto just under 12 points per game. She's second in the Centennial Conference in 3-point shooting at 43% and a 42% shooter from the floor. And Sierra Burkle is getting 7 rebounds per game, and she is the Centennial Conference leading shooter. She shoots 56% from the floor. They are just a team that has so many different options. You can't just beat them one way. For Gettysburg, they have 3 of the top 10 shooters in the Centennial. Jess Porter, Emily Gibbons is tremendous to watch. Sam Pagel shooting just under 49% as well. I do think Haverford comes away with that one. I think no matter who wins, I give advantage to the Green Terror. McDaniel, it's kind of like Hopkins this year. It's hard to pick against them. I do think actually Gettysburg matches up a little bit better against McDaniel than Haverford does, but I don't see Gettysburg making it to that game. McDaniel just so strong. Coach Becky Martin, 34th season. She has a veteran squad as well. They started the season off with 9 in a row, took a loss. They won 13 in a row in the middle of the season. And you want to talk about weapons, that's a squad that really, if you stop one of them, there's going to be someone else to step up and make you pay. If it's not Lindsay Nichols, it's Alyssa March. If it's not Alyssa March, it could be Carly Zepps. You can go on down the line with that roster. So it maybe Gettysburg matches up a little bit better, but whoever goes up against the number 1 seed, they're going to run into a buzzsaw.
Connor, let's turn over to you. When you look at the Green Terror of McDaniel, they really ride the energy and the shooting of Steph Perez and Lindsay Nichols. You got to believe if those two are on, they're going to be tough to beat in the semifinal.
Yeah, absolutely. When they're on, they're one of the more dangerous 1-2 duos in the entire conference. But Haverford, if they get by Gettysburg, which I think they will, has a pretty good 1-2 duo themselves of Lynch and Pizzuto, and can pose problems for the Green Terror. Haverford, the defending conference champions. It's hard to believe that Haverford last year hosted the conference tournament at 15-3, and this year they sit at 13-5, and they're hosting the 4-5 game. What a difference a year makes. And then there's a 3-game drop off to Gettysburg, and then there's a whole 4-game drop off from 5th seed down to the 6th seed. Just shows you how good the top teams in the conference were this year. But Steph Perez, we mentioned 42% shooting from 3, senior, very dangerous. Lindsay Nichols, doesn't play a ton of minutes. She's a player that doesn't even average 30 minutes per game. Still second in the conference for scoring, almost 19 points per game. First in the amount of 3-pointers she's made per game, up to 2.3 per contest. And McDaniel, very outstanding team, not on offense but defense as well. One of the best teams, not even just in the conference statistically, but in the entire country when it comes to turnovers forced, steals, points against. They're very much similar to how Haverford was a season ago, where the Fords going into the conference playoffs were, the class of the conference as far as on the defensive side goes. McDaniel is very much the same this year. You're talking about a team that's got 4 players in the top 11 of the conference in steals. Just a very outstanding team offensively. They lead the conference in scoring at 68.3 points per game, but they're also one of the best teams defensively. Really makes for a dangerous combination. So McDaniel can force turnovers against this Haverford team, which, the Fords, something that Haverford doesn't do a lot of. So if McDaniel can create those extra possessions, sort of distance themselves away from the Fords. I think I sort of gave away my 4-5 prediction here. But I think McDaniel will be in good shape if they can do that.
Dave, let me throw it over to you. You have a regionally ranked team in McDaniel playing in one semifinal. You have a regionally ranked team in Muhlenberg who swung into the rankings after beating Elizabethtown in the other semifinal. What's your take on what the tournament's going to mean for both of those two teams going forward to the national balloting on Sunday?
Well, the first thing I think McDaniel's, and they'll tell it to you as well, they have to win this conference. Their strength of schedule is anything but pretty. And that loss that they just took doesn't help them. That loss to Hopkins 61-52 at home really kind of hurts them because that's not even a regionally ranked opponent, so you can't even garner that in. Yeah, it might help their SOS a little bit. Forgive me as I do a quick word search for McDaniel. Their SOS is a 469, is 341st currently among 440 teams. Nothing against McDaniel, but they'll tell it to you too. They got to get into the tournament by winning the AQ. On the flip side of that, for Muhlenberg, I think they're in the same situation. I think they're too deep in the regional rankings to make a difference. They do have a decent SOS of a 535, at least from the last we can tell on the simple math. Women is simple math, men is complicated math, and that's why I can find the women pretty easily. But in the Mid-Atlantic, Muhlenberg sitting 5th. You got to figure Salisbury, Scranton, and Stevenson are getting in no matter what, even if they take another loss. So that means McDaniel and Muhlenberg hit the table next. Muhlenberg's in better shape, but that also means another loss. Can they get in with 7 losses? McDaniel, not in good shape. They have a second loss. That would mean a third loss with a sub-500 SOS nobody at McDaniel thinks they can get in unless they win the AQ. Nobody's going to host from the Centennial. I think if it's a two-bid league, it's Muhlenberg versus McDaniel in the championship game, and Muhlenberg gets in because they lost. I don't think McDaniel can do it. And that puts a lot of pressure on these teams. I think Becky Martin will tell you right now that that's probably the message she's telling her team. If you want to play in the NCAA tournament, we need to keep winning, and we can't rest on the laurels just because we're at home. And if you're Ron's team, I mean, he's a good coach, but it wasn't much of it was a semi-close game last time they faced each other. I think he's probably got the same message to him. If you want to get in the tournament, we gotta get the job done and win the AQ. And it's not unheard of that a conference gets no at-large or a region gets no at-large bids. Not unheard of at all. And a lot can change. Listen, we got the regional rankings that'll come out on Wednesday. Who knows if any of that will shift around. The top three all lost, which is fascinating. Salisbury and Scranton and Stevenson all lost. They won't shift out of that top three. But McDaniel lost too. And what will happen with Muhlenberg? So I hate to be blunt, but I think the Centennial could very well be a one-bid league. And this is a league that's gotten 3 or 4 teams in before. But I think there's strength of schedule is not helping McDaniel, and the number of losses is not helping Muhlenberg. That I think you're going to be playing for all the marbles come Saturday to get in the NCAA tournament or go home.
Certainly makes for an interesting tournament this weekend. We'd like to thank Dave for joining us. Dave is celebrating a birthday today, I understand, and I believe the family wants to celebrate with him. So, Dave, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it. We're going to continue on for a few more minutes, but we understand if your young kids want to have some cake with Dad. So
they
want
to have a little daddy time. I appreciate it, guys. They've been sitting outside that door for a little while. I'm going to go and join them. Thanks for letting me take part in this. This is fun. I'll look forward to seeing the women's games on Friday and watching everything else online on Saturday.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
See you,
Doug,
Dave.
let's get a little bit more of a read on the Green Terror, like as we've talked about. When Lindsay Nichols is on, the team just seems to rise to another level, don't they?
Yeah, they sure do. It's amazing the progress that she's made from last year, her sophomore year, into her junior year, and a lot of people forget that she's just a junior. But with Lindsay, there's the upside of she can take over a game, and that's something I think McDaniel missed last year, and I think that's one of the reasons they were ousted come semifinal time. Now on the downside, there is a point where she can force a little bit too much and try to be the player that takes over and doesn't quite take over. Now, more often than not, obviously, with just a couple of losses this year, other players have evened that out. A lot of people mention Steph Perez. Obviously, she can hit from outside. Alyssa March, big player down low, has kind of broken out of her shell this year. Carly Zepps. But then a lot of people forget the name Emma Wingard. A big player, captain, senior, very experienced, knows what she's doing. She can dish it out. She can even bring the ball up past the timeline. So, that's just in itself so many players who can help out. And then Brittany Davis, by the way, as well, who can score every once in a while, but, one of the best turnover to assist to turnover ratios in not only the Centennial, she has the best, but all of NCAA Division III, a special player at that. So, yeah, I think it rides on Lindsay. I think winning the conference tournament probably rides on Lindsay. I don't think the Green Terror necessarily want to say that because of the pressure that it might put on her.
Understood. Let's turn our attention to the other semifinal, Muhlenberg against Johns Hopkins. And looking at that matchup, you have two great coaches, Ron Roan for the Mules, Nancy Funk for the Blue Jays. But the one difference that jumps out at you on the stat page is the dominating player that resides in Allentown and Leanna Talamy.
You didn't say who you wanted to take this one, Steve.
I'm going to turn it over to Brian to start.
All right, yeah, I'll go for it. Leanna Talamy.
I clicked on your box, and surprisingly enough, you didn't get the cue from the producer. It's okay.
Yeah.
Is the coffee machine nearby, Steve? We got about another 20 minutes yet.
Anyways, Muhlenberg. When I think of Muhlenberg, I think of a team that's really well-rounded. They have two of the top rebounders in the conference, but they can also shoot from outside. 6 seniors on that squad. Yeah, Leanna Talamy, she's the only player in the Centennial averaging a double-double, 18.5 points per game and 11 rebounds per game. She shoots from 47% from the floor. But we look at some of the other players they have. Nicole Pepe is a tremendous three-point shooter. Christina Santone, she also bangs on the boards as well. I think she's third in the Centennial Conference in rebounds. They are going to be dangerous, and there's a reason that they are the number 2 seed in the conference. And I think they are coming in with a little bit of swagger. They have played very hard, and they've had some. They've taken a couple of losses. They've taken their dings, but every single time they've gotten knocked down, they've gotten back up again. And when you look at them matching up against Johns Hopkins, really this matchup, I think, of any of the matchups in either the men's or women's side, are the two teams that are the most dissimilar to one another. Muhlenberg has a couple of really standout star players. Obviously, Leanna Talamy. But with Johns Hopkins, they're incredibly well-rounded, but don't necessarily have those standouts. They have a lot of veteran leadership, 7 seniors and 5 juniors, but they don't have a single player who averages more than 10 points per game scoring. They got a lot of names that we've become familiar with and can really hurt you when they need to, in terms of Liz Tomasi and Katie Clark and Beatrice Williams. And the other thing I like about Johns Hopkins is that they know how to win on the road. They can travel and win. They're 7-3 on the road. So they're going to be a tough squad to handle. And whereas you can sort of key in on 1 or 2 of the players from Muhlenberg, with Johns Hopkins, you definitely cannot do that just because they just have so many players who are so well-rounded. It's a very difficult way to try to manage them when you're playing against them.
Connor, you certainly look at the Blue Jays, and they have a lot of size and strength inside. You have Haley Bush, Kira McCullough, Maggie Fruhan. They have a lot of inside presence that may cause Talamy some problems.
Yeah, you're right. They do have a lot of that inside presence, and despite that, as Brian mentioned, there's no real one player on the Blue Jays that stands out, not only with the scoring, but there's not a single player for Hopkins that's in the top 15 of the conference in rebounding, which is kind of surprising on a team of the Blue Jays that's third in the conference as a team in rebounding margin, plus 7.5 per game. But despite that, not one real solid presence per se as far as in the top 15 in the league. It just means that everybody on that team is outstanding at what they do, which is obviously a credit to Coach Funk for Hopkins. We mentioned we have a matchup of 2 of the better coaches in the league, and Coach Funk and Coach Roan for the Mules. These two teams, they split the season series earlier this year, but Muhlenberg, that loss they took to Hopkins earlier this year was in the midst of a 3-5 start that Muhlenberg had, but since then, the 17 games since, just 2 losses for Muhlenberg over the last 17 games, 15 wins during that time. But I think Hopkins can give them trouble. The one thing that scares me about the Blue Jays, they sit 13-5 in the league, just 3-5 against the other conference teams that made the playoffs. And they were swept by the 5 seed in Gettysburg. So what Hopkins really hopes is that the Bullets don't make a run all the way to the championship game if it happens to get that far. But the Blue Jays, they managed to beat the rest of the league undefeated against the teams that did make the playoffs. But against the really good teams, they struggled a little bit. And this is a Hopkins team that offensively, defensively, they don't do anything that great, but they're not really bad in anything. They're just sort of middle of the pack in terms of scoring and scoring defense, which can either be a good thing or a bad thing. It depends on which Hopkins team shows up against Muhlenberg. The Muhlenberg team is going for their 6th title in the last 10 years that has the experience. Should be a good matchup, and I think the Blue Jays will be ready. We'll just see who steps up.
Let's go ahead, gentlemen, and put on your prognostication hats and tell me who's going to win the 2015 Centennial Conference Women's Basketball Championship. Doug, we'll start with you.
This is a tough one. I'm going to go with the Green Terror. Bias aside, really bias aside, just talent-wise, I think they have the players who can take it over. But we've seen them even in a couple of wins this year struggle. I think that if they happen to match up, against who scares me more is Muhlenberg. I think that's the team that scares me a little bit more. I think McDaniel probably played their worst game of the season and the second loss of the season against Johns Hopkins. So I'm not too worried. But Talamy is a great player, and I think that could be a neck-to-neck battle. in that championship game. But I think the Green Terror advance past the semifinals. I don't want to say with ease, but I think they get it done. And then I think that they'll take the crown this year. And like Dave McHugh said, they need it. They need the AQ unless they're not getting into the tournament.
You know, in some respects, it looks like the NCAA tournament starts tomorrow night, as no one wants to leave their fate as an at-large bid with the committee. Brian, your choice for champion.
I think we're going to see a matchup 1-2, McDaniel-Muhlenberg. And, yeah, this is a tough one. My gut says Muhlenberg. Leanna Talmy is just so talented. And you think back to the last time that these two teams matched up down in Westminster, and Muhlenberg did such a good job of shutting down Lindsay Nichols. I do think that she'll be ready. I think that she's going to be looking for a measure of redemption. They are a tremendous team, but having seen both of them play, I think that Muhlenberg is quick. They're strong. I think they can bang down low, and if McDaniel can get a fast start in that game, I think that maybe they're going to have a good chance to do it, maybe ride some of that momentum they have at home. But right now, I just got to go with the Mules, just based on what I've seen out of them this year. No offense.
Connor, we'll turn the panel's attention to you now. I guess you're going to have the deciding vote.
Yeah, it feels like this happens every single year. But I tell you, I would not be surprised at all. I think McDaniel's been the best team in the league this year, but I would not be surprised at all if Haverford gives them a solid run for their money in that 1-4 game. You're talking about a Fords team, defending conference champions. I know they're just the 4th seed this year, but they have a lot of that veteran leadership. They have a coach in Bobby Morgan who's outstanding. I think she'll have the Fords ready to play. McDaniel clearly been the best team in the league this year. I think they will find a way to beat Haverford. I think Muhlenberg takes care of business against Hopkins. I think Talmy is going to be too much. And then we get that 1-2 final, which anyone who knows me knows that I absolutely hate pick and chalk, but that's what I've done here. I've got 1 versus 2. It very well could come down to the rebounding. And this is a McDaniel team that has a negative rebounding margin per game, but a Muhlenberg team that's tied with Gettysburg with a plus 8.7 rebound per game margin, which leads the conference. But one thing that Muhlenberg doesn't do that McDaniel does is force a ton of turnovers. And this is a McDaniel team I mentioned earlier, near the tops in the country as far as that category goes. And of all the teams in the playoffs, McDaniel's got the best record against other playoff teams, so they're battle-tested. All the top 3 seeds all went undefeated 10-0 against the teams that didn't make the conference this year. So it comes down really to how you did against your fellow teams that made the tournament. Mm-hmm. McDaniel was 6-2. They got Muhlenberg in the rematch the second time around, while the Mules were in the midst of, I believe, was a 9-game win streak that McDaniel put an end to. And that game was in Westminster. This game's also going to be in Westminster. I think it's going to be close. I think Talmy's going to have an outstanding game and possibly post that double-double. She's already got, I think, 17 double-doubles this season, 1,000-point score. But in the end, McDaniel consistently has been the best team in the league all year. I said the same thing with the men earlier. It was hard to pick against the team that's consistently be the best, and I'm riding the same way here. I think McDaniel finds a way to win.
As we start to bring our broadcast to a close, let's ask our panel about the selections for Centennial Conference Women's Player of the Year, and we've already talked about Lindsay Nichols from McDaniel. We've talked about Leanna Talmy from Muhlenberg. 2 others I think are certainly worthy of consideration. Ella Larson from Swarthmore has had an outstanding year, despite the fact that the Garnet did not make the playoffs. Actually, the person that really makes the Haverford Fords run is Jackie Pizzuto, who will probably be in the mix as well. Brian, we'll start with you. Your choice for Player of the Year on the women's side.
At one point during the year, we were calling a women's game, and we were talking about sort of the talent that there is in the Centennial Conference this year. We said that it was a who's who of who's in the post, and I think that you could very easily pick from any of the five top forwards or centers in the conference, and they would be the top 5 players in the Centennial Conference. As you said, Elle Larson, Leanna Talmy. You think about a player like Jess Parada at her sinus, who's getting 16 and 8, and she's a 43% shooter. Christina Santone, the second forward for the Mules. Jess Porter as well, getting over 15 points per game, 7 rebounds, 44% shooting from the floor. I think it's going to be a toss-up in my mind between Leanna Talmy and maybe even Jess Parada or Elle Larson. Not to short Lindsay Nichols at all. I think if Swarthmore had made the playoffs, it would be a pretty easy choice, and you go Elle Larson getting 21 and almost 10, 9.6. But it's going to be tough to overcome sort of the shortcomings of the rest of her squad. Maybe just in terms of players that I've seen, and we're going to go ahead and you can chalk it up to selection bias, but Leanna Talmy was just so tremendous to watch and so talented and really just went out and was a game changer. And I think if you think of a player who's got to be player of the year, you think it's got to be a game changer. And Talmy, third in the conference in points per game, first in rebounds per game, shooting just a hair under 50%, but honestly, just she can shoot from everywhere, not just inside. Fortunately, she has some other players around her who can spread the floor a little bit. I got to go with Leanna Talmy, and I just think what we've seen, she's just so strong.
I'll turn it over to Connor. Your choice for Centennial Women's Player of the Year.
Yeah, I'm with Brian on this one. Not to take away from what Lindsay Nichols has done for McDaniel this year. She's been outstanding. But going back to what Brian said for a second about Elle Larson, I think she will get some consideration. And remember back to just a season ago where we were debating the same thing. I was making the argument for Talmy last year. Others were making arguments for Nina Voigt for Haverford. And then, lo and behold, Swarthmore doesn't make the playoffs, and who wins Player of the Year but Katie Lytle? And we all kind of said, well, we could see that happening, but we don't think there's a good chance of that happening. And then it did wind up happening. So don't be surprised if Larson gets a little consideration this year. But that being said, Talmy, third in scoring, first in rebounding, and 17 double-doubles. She's been consistent game in and game out, and she's got Muhlenberg sitting one game out of the top seed and being able to host the tournament. Nichols does a couple things well. Talmy is one of those players that does almost everything well, which is why I think that she gets the nod over Nichols at this point.
And now we'll ask the play-by-play voice of the color analyst of the Green Terror, his choice for Women's Player of the Year. Doug.
Yeah, guys. We're actually going to go with a clean sweep here. I do believe that Leanna Talmy will take Player of the Year. And obviously it's not easy to pick against a Lindsay Nichols, but when I think of Player of the Year, you think a complete game changer whose team may not have even been in, who knows, the top 5 when it comes to be said and done. And I think without Leanna Talmy, that team's not even close to being. So Lindsay Nichols obviously does tons right, but I think personally she's got much more of a supporting cast to do those things right as well. And I think that comes into Player of the Year. It's not player with the best team of the year. It's the Player of the Year. And I think Leanna Talmy, with the top 5, third in points per game, top rebounding, and doing everything else that she does with the experience that she has, I give that a little bit.
Let's give each of you the opportunity for some final thoughts as we wrap up our playoff preview for 2015. Brian.
Yeah, well, first, I just want to take a second to thank you guys for having a little chat about the conference. I know that also for everyone who's watching, there aren't too many casual D3 or Centennial Conference fans, so we have a lot of respect for the people who tune in, and we try and reward you guys by talking to you like what you're talking about, because presumably you do, and it's been a lot of fun being a part of the conference this year. I think we're really looking forward to getting to see how this all plays out in the conference tournament, if that hasn't been made abundantly clear by the fact that we're coming up on an hour and a half talking about the conference. And it's been a really great year and a really great opportunity to get into gear going into the playoffs. So just thanks to everyone who's taken their time to tune into the games all year long, and it's been a real treat and a real honor to be able to be a part of that with you.
Connor, your thoughts?
Yeah, saying to what Brian said, want to thank everyone for watching. Excuse me, not only our chat tonight, but our broadcasts all year long. You know, we're three guys, and you as well, Steve, that work very hard to perfect our craft and do what we do. And we hope that the viewers and listeners at home, you know, get the same enjoyment out of the games that it sounds like we have. Because as much fun as everyone has watching and listening to the games, you know, we're having just as much fun covering the teams, our respective teams that we work for. So I just want to thank all the fans for watching, not only tonight but all season long. A little bit of a rougher year for me than other broadcasters, per se. Doug, you've got two playoff teams. Congratulations. And then Brian, you've got one of the better men's teams in the league. And yeah, it's still win or lose when your teams are winning or losing. It's still fun just to be able to do what we do and provide entertainment and insight to the fans and parents and everyone alike at home. So it's been a lot of fun. Division III is a lot more fun than lots of people might want to give it credit for, because they always watch the Division I games. But trust me, this level is just as fun as the higher level, and the interaction we get with parents and fans that gives us encouragement to do what we do and be able to do programs like this is great. So I just want to thank everyone.
Doug, you're the rookie. We'll give you the final word for the panel.
How's that work, huh? No, thanks. Thanks for having me. Join here and obviously filling in for Tim tonight, who's done a great job for McDaniel Athletics in general. But I'll tell you, going off what Connor said, and interaction with the fans and parents, I think that's part of the coolest thing that we have as broadcasters and working for institutions, is that after a game or during halftime or pregame or whatever it may be, having people kind of come up to you, and that's something that we appreciate. Because it kind of keeps us going, and being in the profession, a lot of people don't understand how much time it takes and the research, and not the most sleep that you don't get the most sleep sometimes. So it's definitely appreciated for what the fans do for us, even though they might not realize it. So I think that's pretty cool, and it's been great year 2 for me to be part of McDaniel, and year 1 to be a part of this.
These three guys are the reasons why you've enjoyed your broadcasts all season. Brian Stabby from Franklin and Marshall, Connor Flegel from Washington College, Doug Raftery from McDaniel. Thank you guys for joining us. A reminder that you can watch all the men's, the 4 games in the men's tournament will be available online, centennialconference.tv. If you want to order tickets, you can order them through Johns Hopkins being 9 o'clock Tuesday morning. Call 410-516-7490. You can watch all four games. You watch the first round game tomorrow night, Gettysburg-Haverford on Centennial Conference TV. Then we move over to our partner, McDanielAthletics.com/live video, and they'll bring you the Friday and Saturday Final Four. For my panel, my name is Steve Ulrich, Executive Director of the Centennial Conference. Thank you for joining us. If you stuck with us all evening live, we really appreciate it. If you watched it archived, we appreciate it as well. We hope you enjoy this weekend's tournament, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.